Hi guys! In this episode we're going to deep dive into the fascinating history of Skebo Manor and the surrounding village of Skebobruk. And this is something that you specifically asked for, so we really hope that you enjoy it, so here it is.
In the quiet heart of Uppland, about an hour north of Stockholm, lies Skebo Manor. This beautiful manor is not just a home, it's a gateway to Sweden's industrial past. From its connection to the thriving iron industry to the skilled Vallonian craftsmen who shaped its legacy, there's so much history to uncover here. Our journey starts in the 1400s. Long before the manor was built, Skebo's rich natural resources caught the attention of ironmakers. In 1444, records mention a small blast furnace by Skebo Creek, the earliest known iron production in Uppland. The location was ideal. The stream provided water power, dense forests supplied wood for charcoal, and iron ore was available in the region. Sweden's dependence on iron was growing, and places like Skebo would soon be pivotal. Fast forward to the 17th century. Sweden is emerging as a Baltic superpower, hungry for iron to make weapons and tools. In 1626, a German-born merchant named Heinrich Lemmens established Skebo's first iron hammer forge on this very stream. That year is considered the official birth of Skebobruk, the Skebo Ironworks. It was perfectly timed. The 30 Years' War was raging in Europe, driving up demand for cannons, muskets, and all things iron. In fact, much of Skebo's iron early on went to the Norrtälje weapon factory, becoming musket barrels and swords for the Swedish army. In the late 1600s, the Swedish iron industry welcomed a wave of skilled immigrants, the Walloons, or Vallonians as they're sometimes called. These were iron workers from the Wallonia region of today's Belgium, renowned for their expertise. By the 1680s, the first Walloon families arrived in Skebo. They brought advanced forging techniques and specialized knowledge that would transform Skebo into a true Walloon ironworks. With their help, Skebo produced high-quality bar iron that was in demand across Europe. In fact, Skebobruk became known for its reliable iron. It even had one of Sweden's earliest iron trademarks stamped on its bars to guarantee quality. The partnership of local resources and Walloon skill paid off. By the turn of the 18th century, Skebobruk was thriving. There was a blast furnace here to smelt pig iron and multiple forges to refine it. An interesting note: after a fire in 1686 destroyed Skebo's original blast furnace, the owners rebuilt a new furnace in Edsbro, a few miles away, and linked it to Skebo by a barging route across Lake Nederingenen. This clever move split the operations. Edsbro handled smelting, Skebo did the forging, and ensured efficient use of the region's forests for charcoal. The ironmasters of Skebo sent tons of iron abroad, feeding the workshops of Britain, the Netherlands, and beyond. Swedish wrought iron, especially from places like Skebo with Dannemora ore, was considered some of the best in the world. By around 1700, Skebobruk had firmly established itself. The Walloon influence wasn't just technological, it was human. Many Walloon families settled here for generations, marrying into Swedish families, forming a unique cultural blend. They brought new traditions, language snippets, and craftsmanship that left a lasting mark on the community. Skebo was no longer a solitary mill in the woods. It was a hub of innovation in Sweden's Iron Age, setting the stage for growth in the centuries to come. At its peak in the 1800s, Skebobruk was one of the largest workplaces in the Roslagen region, employing several hundred workers. Life here revolved entirely around the ironworks. The Brukspatron, the ironworks owner or manager, was the patriarch of the community, and the workers, blacksmiths, colliers, charcoal burners, miners, carpenters, and many more, formed a close-knit society. Everyone had a role. Men toiled in the forges and workshops, enduring the heat and thunderous noise of hammer on anvil. Women played a crucial part too. They kept households running, tended vegetable gardens and livestock, and some even worked in ancillary jobs like sorting charcoal or ore. The museum records note that the woman's role was important in Skebo, underscoring that this was very much a family economy. Children attended a local school. Skebo had its own schoolhouse by the late 1800s and would later often apprentice at the brook or in service of the manor. Daily life was arduous. The work bell rang early, and long hours at the furnace or forge were common, 6 days a week. But there was a strong sense of community here. The company provided housing on this street. Notice how these houses are all similar, built by the Iron Company. Several families might share one cottage, each with a small apartment. Neighbours were also co-workers and often relatives. Generations of sons followed fathers into the smithy. In the workers' village were rows of simple cottages with laughter, hard work, and likely the occasional complaint about wages or long hours. It was a paternalistic system. The ironworks company often paid wages partly in goods or script usable at the company store, and in return expected loyalty and hard work. Yet, many who lived here took pride in their craft and their community. Skebobruk was their world, a village built on iron. They had a saying that, where there is iron, there is life, and Skebo was full of life in those days. Skebo was not unique in this lifestyle. Dozens of ironworking villages across Sweden operated in much the same way during the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. They formed the backbone of Sweden's pre-industrial economy. What makes Skebo special is how early and long-lasting its operations were. Remember, iron was made here as early as the 1440s, and the brook kept running until the 1920s. Few communities saw such continuity. Through all those years, generations of Skebo families were born, laboured and died here, leaving an indelible human imprint on this place. As we walk these streets today, there's a palpable sense of their presence in the preserved houses and even in the old road layout. It's a testament to a way of life that has vanished but not been forgotten. Skebo Manor, in its current form, was built in the late 1760s during the golden age of the ironworks. The man responsible was Jacob Grill, a Dutch-Swedish ironmaster who acquired Skebo around that time. It's said that Jacob spared no expense, wanting a manor that reflected his status and the prosperity of the ironworks. The result was a symmetrical, classical mansion, a style very much in vogue in Europe then. The manor has a central main building and accompanied by two wing buildings on either side. The design is balanced and harmonious. Count the windows, and you'll see they are evenly spaced, the same number on the left and right, creating a mirror image. This symmetry was influenced by 18th century European architectural trends, particularly the classical ideals coming out of France and Italy at the time. In fact, contemporary accounts hint that some design inspirations may have come from Southern Europe. Let's look at a few features. The front door sits at the center, crowned by a decorative pediment. The roof is a graceful hip style with small dormer windows peeking out, an influence from French architecture. The exterior would have been even more of a statement. Records mention an ornate garden laid out in the French style, geometric flower beds and pathways. Immediately around the house in the 1770s, statues and a fountain might have adorned the grounds. Later on, as taste changed in the 19th century, the owners likely landscaped parts of the property into an English park, a more naturalistic garden with winding paths, picturesque lawns, and exotic trees. In those days, having an English garden was a status symbol for the elite, showing you were cultured and up to date with international fashions. Skebo's park would have been a place for leisurely strolls, a bath house on a small island off the park, and an orangery which still exists on the grounds, for growing citrus and exotic plants in the chilly Swedish climate, and a Swiss hut located far and away in the park. Just imagine gentlemen in tailcoats and ladies in silk dresses wandering these grounds on a summer evening, while the sounds of the working forge echoed faintly in the distance. The manor wasn't just a home, it was a symbol. It represented the wealth and ambition that the iron industry brought. During the 1800s, as Skebobruk prospered, this house became a center of society. The historical records mention that later 19th century owners filled the rooms with art, fine furniture, and sculptures, and Skebo Manor became a gathering place for the local gentry. Dances, dinners, and hunts would be hosted here. You cannot help but admire the craftsmanship and vision that went into Skebo Manor. Its very existence today, well over 250 years since it was built, is a testament to the quality of its construction and the care it has received. But as grand as this house is, it could not escape the fate tied to the ironworks. When the iron industry declined, so did the fortune of Skebo, and this mansion too would face an uncertain future. No empire lasts forever, and by the late 19th century, storm clouds were gathering over Sweden's traditional ironworks. The world was changing, steel production was modernizing, larger mills and imports began undercutting the old forges, and resources like timber for charcoal were dwindling. Skebobruk, which had flourished for so long, started feeling the pressure. Still, it hung on impressively into the early 1900s, even when many other ironworks in the region shut down in the 1880s. Good management kept Skebo going a bit longer, but by 1900, it was clear that the old ways couldn't compete much longer. In 1903, the last ironmaster of the old era, Knut Michelson, threw in the towel. He sold Skebobruk and the manor to a group of businessmen. Instead of investing to modernize, those new owners began selling off assets. The great machines and pride of Skebo were being dismantled piece by piece. A dramatic blow came in 1913. The dam holding back Lake Njedingen burst, causing the lake, which fed water to power the mill, to drop 2 meters. This devastated Skebo's power supply. Strangely, the lake was never restored. Instead, they hastily built a railroad link to haul iron from Edsbro's furnace to Skebo. These were desperate, stopgap measures. World War gave a brief uptick in iron demand, a final sugar rush for the dying brook. But it wasn't enough. By the early 1920s, operations had ground to a halt. In 1924, Skebobruk went bankrupt, marking the end of nearly 3 centuries of ironmaking here. After the closure in 1924, many industrial buildings were demolished or fell into ruin. The ironworks had no reason to be anymore. The great blast furnace at Edsbro, which had fed Skebo since the 1680s, was shut down. Today only its brick ruins remain, silent in the forest. By the 1930s, Skebo was a shadow of its former self. Many workers' families moved away to find jobs elsewhere, leaving the village population to shrink. Yet, not everything was lost. Skebobruk left behind a physical legacy, the manor house, of course, and some of the worker housing on Bruksgatan, plus a few industrial relics. Here in Skebobruk, you can still find the old Walloon forge building, some storage barns, and even an orangery that once nurtured citrus for the manor. Walking the site, you might notice earth mounds or old stone walls. These are likely foundations of the furnaces, forges, and mills that are no more. It's quiet now, with nature reclaiming many of the spots where furnaces roared. The closing of the ironworks was not just an economic event, it was the end of a community's way of life. Imagine the final day. The furnaces go cold. The last wagon of iron shipped out, and the smiths and miners say goodbye to jobs their families had held for generations. It must have been heartbreaking for the remaining 200 or so residents. However, Skebo was fortunate in one respect. Its history was not forgotten. The buildings that survived became touchstones for memory. In the decades after the closure, various efforts were made to preserve Skebo's story. A museum was eventually established in the village to keep the history of the brook alive, and locals collected artifacts and photographs to make sure future generations remember the significance of Skebobruk. History can be fragile. The ironworks nearly faded into oblivion after 1924, but thanks to a few enduring structures and the dedication of historians, the legacy lived on. The manor itself, however, was about to embark on a very different journey once the era of iron ended, finding new purposes in the modern age. The story of Skebo Manor didn't end with the ironworks. In fact, in the century since the forge fell silent, this house has lived many lives. Let's recap what the manor has been through in modern times. In the mid-1900s, a church-led foundation used the manor as a home for elderly gentlemen of means. The grand salons were converted to common rooms, and old men in cardigans took the place of ironmasters enjoying their twilight years in this stately environment. Starting in 1974, Skebo Manor became a wellness centre. People came here for exercise, healthy diets, and nature therapy, taking in the tranquil parks that once impressed high society. This continued until the early 1990s. In the 2000s, new owners turned Skebo Manor into a country hotel. Guests could sleep in these historic rooms and dine in a grand setting. The restaurant here gained renown, even earning a spot in the White Guide for its excellent, locally sourced cuisine. For a while, Skebo was on the map as a destination for foodies and corporate retreats. After 2013, the manor saw a very different use as it became a temporary home for refugees and migrants seeking asylum in Sweden. At the height of the migrant crisis, this old house opened its doors to families far from their own homelands. One can only imagine the contrasts. And since 5 years ago, Skebo Manor is now once more a private home for the first time since the ironworks owner moved out more than 100 years ago.